What a surprise this reading is. If I hadn't known any better, realizing that Jesus was speaking in first century Rome, I would be thinking he's speaking to us in the United States and Canada today. I'm also reminded of the fact that most of the readings of Jesus' words gives us the picture of a loving pastoral person who speaks softly and kindly, never ruffling anyone's feathers except the despised scribes and Pharisees, make an occasional reaction to Peter or James or John or his own family, but usually a soft-spoken, almost otherworldly leader. This morning's gospel lesson is really an exception. Here we see the Jesus of the scandal in the temple, overturning tables and cracking a whip to drive away the money changers. I'm not an actor, and I can't read the passage with the force and tone it deserves. So I ask you this morning to hear Jesus' words as spoken with the strength of passion. Jesus sounds like he's just about fed up with people and their lukewarm responses to his words of urgency. His message, of course, was the reality of God's love for every person and God's forgiveness of every sin. But that love is the most powerful voice in the world, and God's love acts with a high that reverberates with all kinds of implications. Jesus shows God's love to be in direct opposition to the powers of this world. To accept God's love and the changes it will bring is a challenge, a throwing down, if you will, of a gauntlet, a drawing of a line in the dust. And so Jesus' primary message of love is spoken in words that demand action to honor the dignity and worth of all people. Looking in our own day and time, I look at several actions that would give honor and dignity and worth of all people. For example, Black Lives Matter, increasing justice for indigenous people, dismantling of structures that keep people imprisoned into narrow worlds that don't affirm their human life, being respectful of each other by following the health directives as it pertains to COVID-19. All of these are actions that honor the dignity and worth of all people. All of these, and there are more, that honor and respect the dignity and worth of people. Jesus is a man of peace, but being truly peaceful can only come from the root of deep passion. And so he begins the second part of the gospel, to what will I compare this generation? And that's when I think he's talking to us as well. Jesus describes a generation that can't recognize the truth that is right in front of them. They are like children who can't agree on how to play a game. They thought that John the Baptist was a demon. He was odd, more than eccentric, but a demon. And Jesus to be a glutton, a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They describe Jesus by the company he keeps. And Jesus, on the other hand, compares them to children. They are oblivious like children who are preoccupied with playing games. The Messiah, the one they have been waiting for, is sitting right in front of them, yet they fail to see beyond the superficial appearances of the prophet and the Son of Man. So how many times have each of us been misunderstood, characterized in ways to not truly describe who we are? How frustrating is it for someone to assume they know something about us based on where we grew up or where we went to school or our gender identity or the color of our skin? A number of factors that simply do not capture the complexity of who each and every one of us are. While we generalize based on minimum information, these assessments can be inaccurate for the individual. This is what I call a stereotype. Stereotypes have multiple implications, ranging from violence to discrimination. And most importantly, the effective dimension of stereotyping should also be considered. It's disheartening and disappointing when someone does not see you for who you really are. Realizing that in order to know someone, you must spend time with them and learn who they are. Don't we know people like that? Nothing's ever right, just the way they want it. And so they refuse to enter into any commitment or effort that is offered to them. Can we even see ourselves as some of the children in the marketplace? Disapproval becomes an excuse for taking no action, making no commitment, having no passion. And the result is always that: no commitment, no action, only complaining that the action being suggested isn't just the action we would design. Where there is no passion, there are always excuses for doing nothing. Verses 25 to 30, which is the second half of this morning's reading, Jesus thanks the Father because the Father has hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. He's hidden his wisdom and his love, the intelligence that comes from that, from those who always think they know better than others. The wise and intelligent for any who reject Jesus and his message, but perhaps especially to the religious leaders, whom Jesus often rebukes for their self-importance and hypocrisy. The scribes and Pharisees pride themselves on being learned in the law, yet fail to understand the basics of justice, mercy, and faith. The infants, on the other hand, are not regarded as wise or important. They are the poor in spirit, the meek, the merciful, the persecuted, all whom Jesus calls blessed. They are the sick and the lame, the lepers and demon-possessed, the tax collectors and sinners who come to Jesus for healing of body and spirit. And this is said against the backdrop of religious leaders at that time, and I also wonder in many countries of the world at this time are complicit with Rome or the empire in maintaining the imperial system. Common people labor under this rule while the elites secure wealth, status, and power at the expense of the lowly. Jesus rejects this system out of hand without compromise. And then he issues an invitation. Come to me and I will give you rest. Jesus is promising that life under God's reign in the new world that he's bringing into being. He invites take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. What is this yoke that Jesus is offering? We can infer that part of it is his teaching, his way of discipleship, which is not burdensome, but life-giving and life-affirming. He invites the weary to learn from him, for he is not a tyrant who lords it over his disciples, but is gentle and humble in heart. To take his yoke upon oneself is to be yoked to the one in whom God's kingdom of justice, mercy, and compassion is breaking into this world, and to find the rest for which the soul longs. And for that, I'm deeply appreciative for those of you who have, for the last 6 weeks or so, have been invited on Sundays to share your life and your journey. Particularly the two people last week who talked about the effect of COVID on their lives and the wider church community. The ability to take the yoke being offered, to enter into an understanding of Jesus' teaching within your own context, to embrace that as part of your discipleship, and that it wasn't burdensome, but life-giving. That's what I heard from Rebecca and John last week. And there were two very different stories and narratives. And Jesus invites them and us to learn from him. Take his yoke and be yoked to the one in whom God's kingdom of justice, mercy, and compassion is breaking into this world. And as it breaks into this world, we find rest, the rest for which our own souls long for and deeply desire. The most we desire God. And realizing from a passage like this, to find that God, that we must learn that his yoke is not a burden, but it's life everlasting. We also realize that following Jesus will be full of risks and challenges, as we've talked about and people have talked about for the last 6 weeks as we reflected Sunday after Sunday about the challenges and risks of following the gospel. And Jesus has made it clear that there are risks and challenges for following this way of life, this new way of being, this new world that his whole life is giving birth to. We are being rebirthed, reborn. We're moving into something, to a place we have not been before, and a place often for which there are no answers from the past, only the love of God. Jesus calls us to a life of humble service, but it is a life of freedom and joy instead of slavery. It is life yoked to Jesus under God's gracious and merciful reign, free from the burden of sin and the need to prove oneself, free to rest deeply and securely in God's grace. What a witness. What a gift. And how elusive that can be to us from time to time, because it's right in front of us and often we don't even see it. But it stays in front of us each day, calling each of us daily into life, into new life, into God's love, and showing that in the ways in which we honor the integrity of each other in our families, in our communities, our workplaces, all the places that in which we live. As St. Teresa of Avila says, and her prayer is amazing, people see Jesus in our eyes, in our faces, in our hands, in our feet. There is no other way to see Jesus except through us. And this gospel story today, in another way, as Jesus continually does this, we're beginning that cycle over and over again, as Jesus is getting constantly, urgently exasperated that we're not getting it. So this Sunday and next Sunday, we're going to get lambasted again. Do we get it? We have to get it. It's the only way, and we will have life. Amen.